This is the third part of our spinal cord injury rehabilitation series. And in this video, I'm going to discuss about management of patients with spinal cord injury. As far as rehabilitation of patients with spinal cord injury is concerned, this is broadly divided into restorative approach and compensatory approach. Probably this is a similar approach for other diseases also. Now, what is restorative means where an approach of rehabilitation in which we are trying to regain some of the lost functions, not completely as it was before, but to whatever extent that is possible. The compensatory approach is an approach where where the expectations of the recovery is low, either due to severity of injury or due to several other reasons, that you are trying to bring the patient back to their daily activities in whatever ways they can, not necessarily how they used to do, such as, say, for example, using assistive devices or using compensatory movements and several other methods by which one can compensate and still be able to function in day-to-day activities and integrate with the community that they are living to an extent it is possible, which is very critical as physiotherapists if you're managing patients with spinal cord injury. The goals, what we are going to achieve, that is whether short-term or long-term functional goals, are determined by, first of all, by calculation of patient's ASIA scale. I've discussed this in the previous video where we did about assessments. If you want, you can go and check this out. And the patient's medical and social status, if the patient is having extensive comorbidities or other problems. Social status, this depends upon socioeconomic status and other aspects of society in which they live in. And also the rehabilitation plan can also determine the targets that is going to be achieved. And setting a goal, achievable, realistic goal is critical. One of the common problem in spinal cord injury or in other neurological disease itself, unrealistic goals, that is setting a functional return to function, return to previous function as a goal for all patients, even though all patients wants to return. But as a physiotherapist, we need to determine the severity and extent of recovery that is possible. So ASIA scale here plays a significant role. Again, in the last video, we've discussed about in a complete lesion, what are all the possible expectations patient can have depending upon the level of lesion. If you want, again, you can go back to that video and check this out. Right, the phases of spinal cord injury can be broadly divided into three, that is acute, subacute, and chronic phases. Acute and subacute phases usually where are the phases where we expect a certain amount of spontaneous or natural recovery. Chronic phase is where this recovery phase is plateaued. 12 to 18 months post-injury it's an approximate duration. This tend to vary, but in spinal cord injury, this is sort of accepted period where the treatment that we provide at different stages tend to vary. So we need to keep in mind which phase we are actually intervening. Obviously, in chronic phases, we expect less of a neurological recovery. Functional recovery is still possible, but again, it depends upon quite a lot of factors, especially on the severity of injury. Right, what are the major goals of rehabilitation? Again, I just want to emphasize that before we decide to manage or treat patient, we need to be very clear about what are the goals that our interventions are targeting at, so that we can evaluate to what extent our treatment is working. So these are the common and important goals that for patients with spinal cord injury. First one, preventing secondary complications. Again, as we discussed before, secondary complications can be very serious and life-threatening too, in patient with spinal cord injury. So we really have to develop management strategies that prevent anything that develop and also manage complication which has already developed. Next is promoting and enhancing neurological recovery, especially if you're in acute stage. We really have to work in developing and implementing intervention that promote recovery and maximizing function. That we needed to be able to translate that recovery potential into their functioning in their daily activities. So that has to be an important goal, that we need to measure their functional status and see, monitor how well or to what extent they're able to achieve that. And also the last goal is to establish optimal conditions for long-term maintenance of health and function. This is somewhat not very much emphasized. What this means is that, say, for example, the patient with spinal cord injury, we all know they have to live with this condition. So we have to also create a situation where they can sustain certain level of function for a long periods of time. Say, for example, if you're working on a T12 level of injury, incomplete patients with T12 level, and we are really focusing on walking as a mobility, it might be possible, if depending upon the severity, the patient may be able to walk with the help of orthosis and so on. But we need to keep in mind that can the patient on a long term sustain walking with the orthosis? As we all know, it involves tremendous amount of energy expenditure, and wearing orthosis for a longer period of time also has its complications, and several other factors are in there. So we really have to think from the long-term perspective, that what kind of mobility, what kind of function patient can sustain for a longer period of time. And in the chronic phase, again, this is not just in chronic phase. I don't think that only after 18 months we have to think about it. It all depends. So I'm just giving a gross idea. But if you're having a complete injury, we might have to start early too. So you need to individualize this idea to your patient context, rather than thinking that this is some sort of protocol that you need to follow. Compensatory and assisted approaches are all we needed to consider. And again, when to consider, I leave that up to your clinical judgment. So one of the main goal or intervention is walking training. Several interventions are used. These are all the list of commonly used interventions: body weight support, treadmill training, robot assisted gait training, FES, functional electrical stimulation, overgrown gait training. The current evidence supports that body weight support, treadmill training, and robotic assisted gait training do not increase walking speed more than the overgrown. That is, overgrown walking training seems to be far better. I mean, at least equal, if not better, in terms of improving walking function. That means that investing in body weight support or robotic assisted body weight support to some extent in early stage might be useful, but robot assisted gait training may not really translate into better patient function. This is the current evidence. That's what the current evidence has actually found. I've put that reference just in the slide. You can you can just search and find out if you want to read more. Orthosis. This is just a brief description of what all different orthosis has been used. I recommend you to orthosis prescription video, which is already we have posted. Go through this, where Sheikh has explained very clearly in terms of how do you use orthosis, and what are the factors we need to consider while prescribing orthosis. So you need to go back and look at that video if you really want to know more about orthosis. These are all the common orthoses that are being used: HKAFO, KAFO, and ankle foot orthosis. And this is RGO. Again, you can see it has really up to entire hip it's covering. RGO can be useful to some extent in indoor mobility, or mostly as a tool for therapeutic walking. That is, walking in the clinic just to avoid complications of not standing and walking. It may not translate, it's less likely to translate into a functional walking. And we also have the powered gait orthosis and exoskeletons, where a patient, you can see in the picture that the patient is, you can wear that exoskeleton, and that exoskeleton actually moves it for you. It can be quite useful for patients with complete spinal cord injury instead of just wearing a passive orthosis. But these can be very, very expensive. Maybe in future they become affordable and to many patients. This can be useful, especially for complete spinal cord. FES, functional electrical stimulation, where multiple muscle groups are stimulated at the same time, mimicking a particular function. You can in the picture given for walking, right? This can be used, can improve walking, especially in patients with spinal cord incomplete or complete from T4 to T11 level. And the studies suggest that it can lead to some improvement in walking function. However, the outcome of FES can be much variable depending on a lot of factors. So if at a lower level and lower level injuries, it can be helpful, at least in terms of walking indoor mobility, but it has its complication also. But it may be worth a try for patients with spinal cord injury, especially complete one. Wheelchair prescription, you have different types of manual wheelchair, different types of wheelchair, manual, powered, and scooters. We have seen quite a lot of, we have seen this three-wheeled, where modified two-wheelers, where they add additional two wheels to use by patients who are having low limb difficulty. Mostly in Western countries, high-income countries, they have a very sophisticated, well-developed scooters are available for patients with spinal cord injury to use. And I hope in future we will have more such well-designed, rather than just something that is adapted locally, well-designed scooters that helps them to move around. And wheelchair as a form of mobility, a physiotherapist needs to consider, but the biggest challenge is our environment for use. So accessibility of a wheelchair to common environment is very challenging. So that's why wheelchair use has it's very, very limited, unless the patient is, previously I mentioned about social status. So unless the patient is in a high economic status, high socioeconomic status, they might be able to move in an environment that are far better for accessing their neighborhood. But in many cases, with people with middle and low socioeconomic status, this is almost impossible. Upper limb functions, again, functional training, task-specific functional training can be useful in the earlier stage. There are the principles of functional training. Again, I've just put up a video earlier, so you can again check this out. So we need to consider, if depending upon the severity, functional training for upper limb function, we needed to design something relevant or appropriate to the level and also the capacity of the patient's upper limb. Finally, physical fitness training, it's very essential. Remember, just in a previous slide, I just mentioned that we need to think of a long-term sustainability. So most patients with spinal cord injury require physical fitness, overall general physical fitness training, because of their reduced mobility level can have a deconditioning effect. So several exercise, arm cranking, swimming, freewheeling, and all forms of adaptive physical fitness training, but it has to become part of their daily life, because they need to, especially spinal cord injuries, very common in young adults, from 18 to 35 is the common group of patients who have spinal cord injury. So they needed to focus on improving their physical fitness so that they can sustain challenges of daily functioning. So we needed to have a program that specifically targets improving the overall physical fitness. And this is the recommended physical fitness guidelines based upon available systematic review. So if you want to know, if you want to read, you can just pass the slide and get to know exactly what are the recommended dosage for this. And that's the end of it. I would recommend all of you to go through this KT program, that is Spinal Cord Rehabilitation Project. It's a website that is available to help patients and caregivers and professionals who are managing. So any update on evidence, what works, what doesn't work, what we can do, quite an interesting, quite a useful resources are available. So I recommend all of you to have a browse through this website and get to know. And also many of the evidence that I cited or the content that I have put in all the videos has been taken from these websites. Very useful. So I recommend all of you to have a look at it. And if you want to update and want to read more about various research that are done or being done or called completed research findings, you can have a look at this website. They provide very useful resources. And that's it. This is the end of part 3 and the end of spinal cord injury series also. My idea of the spinal cord injury series is it's just to provide an overview of information that would help students and also novice clinicians who are just starting to learn to manage spinal cord injury, for them to get an idea of what are all the things that needs to focus. So I hope you find it useful. If you're having any comments, and feel free to share it in the comment section. Thank you very much.